John always scoffed at ghost stories. He found them to be nothing more than the product of overactive imaginations, fueled by fear and superstition. To him, the world was a place of logic and reason, where every mystery had a rational explanation waiting to be uncovered. He preferred logic, reason, facts. His days were spent buried in books and research, always seeking the truth behind the unknown. He was a man of science, a firm believer in the tangible and the provable. His Aunt Pen, however, swore by the strange and unexplained. She was a woman of stories, of whispers in the dark and shadows that danced just out of sight. Her tales were filled with ghosts and spirits, with things that went bump in the night. He often humored her tales, but deep down he remained unconvinced. He would listen with a polite smile, nodding at the right moments, but his mind was always elsewhere, searching for the logical explanation behind her words. Then came the news about his uncle's passing. It was a shock, a sudden jolt that pulled him out of his world of facts and figures. His uncle had always been a strong, vibrant man, full of life and energy. The news hit him hard, leaving him reeling. John returned to his childhood home, the old Victorian house on the hill, a place that held a strange allure despite its faded grandeur. The house was a relic of the past, a monument to a time long gone. It stood tall and proud, its once bright paint now peeling and faded. The house seemed different this time, colder, as if a shadow had fallen over it. There was an eerie stillness in the air, a sense of foreboding that sent shivers down his spine. It was as if the house itself was mourning, its very walls weeping for the loss of its master. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp wood and dust. Every step he took stirred up clouds of particles dancing in the dim light that filtered through the dirty windows. The house was a time capsule, a snapshot of a life that had once been vibrant and full. It felt as though the house itself was mourning, its wooden bones creaking under some unseen weight. The floors groaned under his feet, the walls seemed to sigh with every breath of wind. It was a place of memories, of echoes of the past that lingered in every corner. John wandered through the familiar rooms, each one a faded photograph of his childhood. The furniture was covered in dust, the once bright colors now muted and dull. He could almost hear the laughter of his youth, the voices of his family echoing through the empty halls. The floral wallpaper in the hallway, once bright and cheerful, now seemed to wilt under a veil of gray. It was a stark reminder of the passage of time, of the years that had slipped away unnoticed. The patterns were still there, but they were faded, almost ghostly. Even the garden, his uncle's pride and joy, seemed to have lost its vibrancy. The once lush greenery was now overgrown and wild, the flowers wilted and dying. It was as if the garden itself had given up, succumbing to the same sense of loss that permeated the house. The roses drooped, their petals browning at the edges, and the once lush lawn was now a tapestry of green and yellow. The vibrant colors of the past were gone, replaced by a dull, lifeless hue. It was a garden in mourning, a reflection of the sorrow that hung over the house. The whole place felt forgotten, as if time itself had decided to turn its back on the old house on the hill. It was a place of memories, of echoes of the past that lingered in every corner. John couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone, that the house was watching him, waiting for something. It was a place of mystery, of secrets hidden in the shadows, and for the first time in his life, John felt a flicker of doubt in his unwavering belief in logic and reason. Aunt Pen greeted him at the door, her face etched with grief, but something else flickered in her eyes. Fear. It was a fear that seemed to seep from her very soul, a fear that had taken root and refused to let go. John could feel it too, a subtle but persistent unease that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. "It's different, John," she whispered, her voice raspy. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. She glanced around nervously, as if expecting something or someone to appear out of the shadows. Her eyes, wide and filled with a haunting terror, met his, pleading for understanding. Something's not right. John dismissed her words as grief-talking. He tried to reassure her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that she might be right, that something was indeed very wrong. Yet, as the days passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The house, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt cold and unwelcoming. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind seemed to carry a sinister undertone, as if the very walls were alive with secrets. There were sounds in the night, floorboards creaking, whispers carried on the wind. They seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, filling the house with an eerie symphony of unease. John found himself lying awake at night, straining to hear the faintest of noises, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to rationalize the sounds, blaming them on the age of the house and the wind whistling through the eaves, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't convince himself that it was just the house settling. There was something more, something that defied explanation. But the shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, and the air grew colder, clinging to him like an unwelcome embrace. It was as if the house itself was trying to communicate, to tell him something that he couldn't quite grasp. The feeling of being watched, of not being alone, grew stronger with each passing day. John found himself avoiding the attic, a place where childhood toys lay forgotten, the air thick with dust and memories. The attic had always been a place of mystery, filled with relics of the past, but now it felt like a place of foreboding. He couldn't bring himself to go up there, not even in the daylight. One evening, while helping Aunt Pen sort through old photographs, a chill ran down his spine. The photographs, once cherished memories, now seemed to hold a darker significance. Each image felt like a glimpse into a forgotten past, a past that was trying to reach out and make itself known. The air grew heavy, and a low hum vibrated through the room. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very walls, a deep, resonant hum that filled the space with an almost palpable tension. John felt a sense of dread wash over him, a feeling that something was about to happen. He looked up, his gaze drawn to the grandfather clock in the corner. The clock, a family heirloom, had always been a comforting presence, its steady ticking a reminder of the passage of time. But now, it seemed to take on a more ominous tone, its chimes echoing through the room like a warning. It chimed 8 times, each clang a jarring note in the sudden silence. The sound seemed to reverberate through the house, filling every corner with its eerie resonance. John felt a shiver run down his spine, a sense of impending doom that he couldn't shake. His aunt's hand trembled as she reached for a faded photograph, her face pale. The photograph, worn and yellowed with age, seemed to hold a secret, a story that had been buried for years. Aunt Pen's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the image, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke. "This is where it all began," she said, her words filled with a sorrow that cut through the air like a knife. John knew then that the whispers of change were not just in the house, but in their very lives, and that they would have to face whatever was coming together. "It happened here," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "A man, old and frail, came to the house asking for shelter. Your great-grandparents, kind souls that they were, took him in." John listened, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. Aunt Pen continued, her voice laced with dread. "He stayed for a while, then one day he was gone, vanished. But not before he left something behind. A darkness." She spoke of strange occurrences after the old man's disappearance, shadows moving in the night, whispers in the dark. Her voice cracked as she described her own encounters, chills down her spine, the feeling of being watched. John tried to comfort her, attributing it to the stress and grief, but deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The photograph in Aunt Pen's hand showed a tall, gaunt man with piercing eyes standing next to his great-grandparents. The man's face was obscured by shadow, but John could have sworn he felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at the picture. He quickly brushed off the feeling, attributing it to his aunt's eerie tale. The next day, John went for a walk, hoping to clear his head. The events of the previous night had left him restless, and he needed the tranquility of the countryside to find some peace. The morning air was crisp, and the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue over the fields. Birds chirped merrily, and the scent of dew-kissed grass filled the air. John took a deep breath, trying to let go of the unease that had settled in his chest. As he strolled along the edge of the property, he noticed a figure standing by the old bamboo fence. The figure was still, almost as if it were a statue, blending seamlessly with the rustic surroundings. John squinted, trying to make out more details, but the morning mist made it difficult to see clearly. It was an old man, hunched over, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The hat's brim cast a shadow that obscured his features, adding to the air of mystery. His clothes were tattered, and he leaned heavily on a wooden cane, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He seemed familiar, like someone John had seen in a dream. There was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind, a sense of déjà vu that he couldn't shake. He tried to recall where he might have seen the old man before, but his memory was frustratingly blank. The man looked up, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met. John's breath caught in his throat. The old man's gaze was piercing, as if he could see right through him, uncovering all his secrets and fears. John felt a shiver run down his spine. It was as if the temperature had suddenly dropped, and a cold wind had swept through the area, chilling him to the bone. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to ward off the sudden chill. The old man's eyes were cold, devoid of warmth, and John felt an inexplicable urge to turn and run. Those eyes seemed to hold a lifetime of sorrow and pain, and looking into them was like staring into an abyss. He hesitated, his feet rooted to the spot. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but he couldn't move. It was as if an invisible force held him in place, compelling him to stay and face whatever was to come. The old man smiled, a chilling, humorless expression that sent a shiver down John's spine. The smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained as cold and lifeless as ever. It was a smile that spoke of hidden dangers and unspoken threats. "Lost, are you?" the old man rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. The sound was grating, and it seemed to echo in the still morning air, amplifying the sense of unease that John felt. John shook his head, trying to find his voice. His mouth was dry, and his heart pounded in his chest. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was as if his vocal cords had frozen, paralyzed by fear. I live here," John stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He felt foolish, like a child caught in a lie. The old man's gaze never wavered, and John could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. The old man chuckled, a dry, brittle sound that seemed to hang in the air. It was a laugh devoid of joy, more a mockery than anything else. The sound grated on John's nerves, making him feel even more uneasy. "Not for long," he muttered, his gaze fixed on John with an intensity that made his skin crawl. There was a finality in his words, a sense of inevitability that sent a fresh wave of fear through John. John's heart pounded in his chest, and he could feel a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. He knew he had to get away, but his legs felt like lead. The old man's presence was overwhelming, and John felt like he was drowning in a sea